I paid 40Ks for our family Paris trip. My DIL said, I'll handle all the bookings. But at the airport, oops, forgot your ticket. Go home, maybe next trip. They planned to ditch me all along. What I slipped into her suitcase made their dream vacation unforgettable. For all the wrong reasons. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My life for the past year has been an exercise in navigating the quiet, empty spaces left behind by my husband. Our home in Hyde Park, a rambling old greystone that had once echoed with the sounds of a growing family and my late husband's booming laugh, was now just quiet. At 67, I had entered the chapter of my life that was supposed to be about a shared, peaceful retirement. Instead, it was a solo journey. I, Judith Thompson, retired pharmacist and recent widow, was a woman with a comfortable fortune, a lifetime of memories and an ache in my heart that no prescription could cure. It was this ache, this profound and deep-seated need to fill the silence, that gave birth to the idea of Paris. Not just any trip, but a grand, magnificent, once-in-a-lifetime family journey, a final, beautiful opportunity to create a core memory with my only son Keith, and his vibrant, ambitious wife Tiffany. I presented the idea to them on a gray, drizzly Chicago Sunday. They had come over for dinner, and I had cooked their favorites. I waited until after the meal, as we sat in the warm, comfortable living room, the rain tapping softly against the windows. I've been thinking, I began, my voice a little unsteady with the weight of my own hope. Your father and I, we always talked about taking a long trip to Europe. A real one. 3 weeks. We never got the chance. Keith looked at me, his kind eyes full of a gentle, sad sympathy. I know, Mom. He would have loved that. Well, I said, taking a deep breath. I was thinking, why should we let a dream like that just die? I want to do it. For him, for us. I want to take the 3 of us to Paris. 3 weeks. First class all the way. The best hotels, the best food. My treat. A gift to the 2 people I love most in this world. To say their reactions were different would be an understatement. Keith's face was a picture of stunned, boyish delight. Paris? Mom, are you serious? For 3 weeks? That's incredible. Tiffany, however, was a different story. Her beautiful, perfectly made-up face went through a rapid series of micro-expressions: shock, a flicker of something that looked like annoyance, and then a quick, smooth transition into a mask of pure, dazzling joy. It was a masterful performance. Judith, she squealed, her voice a pitch higher than usual. She rushed over and enveloped me in a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. You are the most generous, most wonderful mother-in-law in the entire world. Paris, it's my dream. And so, the plan was born. The next day, I sat down with my financial advisor and arranged the transfer, $40,000. A significant but not catastrophic sum from the fortune I had amassed over a lifetime of carefully managing my pharmacy, of making shrewd investments, of living a life of quiet, disciplined frugality. This money was not for me. It was for them. It was the physical manifestation of my love, my hope that this trip would be a bridge, a way to forge a new, stronger family bond in the wake of our shared loss. It was an investment in a memory, and I was about to find out, in the most brutal and humiliating way, that I was the only one in the room who understood the true meaning of that investment. The moment the $40,000 landed in their joint account, a subtle but seismic shift occurred in the dynamic of our little family trio. I, the benefactor, the one who had conceived of and funded this grand gesture, was immediately and completely relegated to the role of a slightly dotty and entirely irrelevant passenger. And Tiffany, my beautiful, ambitious, and deeply controlling daughter-in-law, took the wheel. It began the very next day. She arrived at my house, a sleek, white tablet in her hand, and a look of bright, efficient determination in her eyes. Judith, she began, her voice a purr of loving, daughterly concern. I was so excited I couldn't sleep last night. I've already started sketching out a preliminary itinerary. But first we need to talk. She sat me down at my own kitchen table, as if I were a client at her office. Planning a trip of this magnitude is a full-time job, she explained, her tone a perfect mixture of professional expertise and gentle condescension. The logistics, the bookings, the reservations. It can be incredibly stressful, and you, after everything you've been through this year, the last thing you need is more stress. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her touch was cool and dry. So, she announced, her smile a dazzling non-negotiable thing. I have a proposal. Let me handle everything. It's what I do after all. Her what I do, of course, was her luxury travel blog, The Gilded Compass. It had a modest but devoted following, a curated collection of beautiful photos of Tiffany sipping champagne in infinity pools, and artfully arranged plates of food at Michelin-starred restaurants. It was her passion, and her fledgling career. It would be my gift to you, Judith, she continued, framing her complete and total takeover as an act of selfless generosity. You've given us this incredible opportunity. Let me give you the gift of a completely stress-free, perfectly curated and utterly unforgettable Parisian experience. I'll handle all the bookings, the flights, the hotels, the tours, the dinner reservations, all of it. All you'll have to do is pack your bags and show up. I hesitated. A part of me, the part that had dreamed of this trip for years, had wanted to be involved. I had old dog-eared guidebooks on my shelves, full of my own handwritten notes, of little bistros and hidden gardens I had always wanted to see. That's very kind of you, Tiffany, I began, but I was hoping we could plan it together. There are a few places. Oh, I know, she interrupted, her smile never faltering. And I want to hear all about them. We'll have a special day, a Judith's Choice Day, where we can go to all your little spots. But for the big things, the really important reservations, you have to be so strategic. The best places are booked out for months. You need an expert on the ground, someone who knows the scene. Trust me, you are in good hands. She was a master. She had validated my feelings, acknowledged my input, and then with a sweet, dazzling smile, had completely dismissed them. She was not asking for my permission. She was informing me of the new reality. I was no longer the architect of this dream. I was a tourist, and she was my guide. And my son, who was standing in the doorway, listening to the entire exchange, just beamed with pride. See, Mom, he said, I told you she was amazing. She's taking all the work off your shoulders. I had been outmaneuvered, outflanked, and my own son was a willing, and indeed a proud accomplice in my demotion. The dynamic for the trip was set in that moment, and it became the template for every interaction in the weeks that followed. Tiffany was the brilliant, energetic visionary, and I was the sweet, slightly out of touch and gratefully passive beneficiary of her expertise. And Keith, my son, was the happy, oblivious and deeply complacent bridge between our two worlds. The scene that I will forever remember, the one that perfectly encapsulated his role in this slow, creeping coup, took place a week later. The three of us were at my house, ostensibly for me to share my own ideas for the trip. I had pulled out my old beloved guidebook to Paris, its pages soft and worn from years of hopeful handling. I was thinking, I began, my voice full of a genuine, almost girlish excitement. We have to go to this little place, Le Bougainville. It's not fancy, it's an old working man's bistro from the 1920s. Your father and I went there on our honeymoon. They have the most incredible cocoa van, and the walls are covered in these beautiful old Art Nouveau tiles. I was sharing more than just a restaurant suggestion. I was sharing a memory, a precious piece of my own history, a connection to the man we had all lost. Tiffany, who was scrolling through her tablet on the other side of the coffee table, did not even look up. A bistro, she said, the word dripping with a faint, almost imperceptible but deeply wounding disdain. I don't think that's really on brand for the content I'm planning to create. Judith, the lighting in those old places is usually terrible, and the aesthetic is a bit dusty. Dusty? I repeated, my voice a little tight. It's historic. It's authentic. Authentic is lovely, she said, still not looking up, but my followers are looking for aspirational. They want to see the new, the now, the next big thing. They're not interested in a history lesson. I've already secured us a reservation at L'Ambroisie. It's 3 Michelin stars. The food is practically art. The photos will be stunning. I looked at my son. I waited for him to intervene. To say, honey, it was important to my mom. We can go for one night. To defend the memory of his own father. Keith, to his credit, tried. He cleared his throat, a small nervous sound. Well, you know, Tiff, he began, his voice weak and hesitant. It might be nice to see a place Dad loved. For old time's sake. Tiffany finally looked up from her tablet. She did not look at me. She fixed her gaze, her powerful and deeply disappointed gaze, on her husband. She did not say a word. She just raised a single perfectly sculpted eyebrow. The look was a silent but clear reprimand. Are you really going to challenge me on this? Are you really going to side with her over me? And my son, my brilliant history professor's son, a man who could lecture for hours on the fall of the Roman Empire, completely and utterly crumbled under the silent tyrannical weight of that single raised eyebrow. He let out a small defeated sigh. But you know, he said quickly, his eyes darting away from mine, you're right. You're the expert. Your itinerary it's incredible. L'Ambroisie it is. He had chosen. In that moment, the choice had been laid bare. His father's memory, or his wife's contentment. His mother's feelings, or his own peaceful conflict-free existence. And he had chosen the path of least resistance. He had chosen her. The complacency in that choice was a small quiet betrayal. But it was a betrayal nonetheless. It was the first, but it would not be the last. A week before our departure, Tiffany presented me with the official itinerary. It was not a simple email or a list of dates. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of modern luxury branding. She arrived at my house with a beautiful custom-made presentation box, tied with a thick, grosgrain ribbon. Inside, nestled on a bed of cream-colored tissue paper, was a thick, leather-bound booklet. On the cover, in elegant gold-leaf script, were the words, "The Thompson Family, a Parisian Dream." I was genuinely, completely and deeply touched. The sheer effort, the meticulous attention to detail, was stunning. This was not the work of a person who was simply going through the motions. This was the work of someone who cared deeply about creating a perfect experience. The quiet, nagging voice of my own suspicion, the voice that had been whispering that something was not quite right, was almost completely silenced by the sheer, beautiful and deeply deceptive weight of this booklet. "I just wanted you to have a proper keepsake," she said, her voice a soft, proud murmur, as I lifted the heavy booklet from the box. "Something to remember our trip by." I opened it. The pages were a thick, glossy cardstock, each one a beautifully designed layout of our upcoming adventure. There were professional magazine-quality photographs of the hotels, the restaurants, the museums. The text was a lyrical, evocative description of the curated experiences that awaited us. It was a fantasy made tangible, a 3-week journey through the very pinnacle of Parisian luxury. We were not just staying in Paris, we were conquering it. Our flights were first class on Air France. Our hotel was not just any hotel. It was a grand premier suite at the Four Seasons George V with a private terrace overlooking the Eiffel Tower. The dining reservations were a gourmand's dream. A table at l'Ambroisie, as she had promised. A tasting menu at Arpège. A simple casual lunch at Le Cinq. She had even managed to secure a booking at a legendary and notoriously difficult to get into patisserie for a private macaron-making class with a world-famous pastry chef. The activities were a whirlwind of exclusive, behind-the-scenes experiences. A private after-hours tour of the Musée d'Orsay. A personal shopping appointment at the flagship Chanel boutique on Rue Cambon. A day trip to Versailles, complete with a private tour of the king's apartments and a picnic on the Grand Canal. I turned the pages, my eyes wide with a mixture of awe and a slight, almost vertiginous sense of disbelief. This was a trip for royalty, for billionaires. This was a fantasy that my $40,000, a sum that had seemed so immense to me, could barely begin to cover. "Tiffany, this is magnificent," I stammered, genuinely overwhelmed. "But how did you possibly afford all of this? This must have cost a fortune." She gave me a serene, knowing smile. The smile of a magician who has just performed a particularly brilliant trick. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, Judith," she said, her voice a soothing, dismissive purr. "I have my connections. I'm a travel blogger, remember. I was able to leverage my brand to get us some industry upgrades. Consider it my contribution to our family adventure." And I, in my hopeful, trusting and deeply foolish heart, I believed her. I believed that her brand had this kind of power. I believed that her love for my son, and her newfound affection for me, had inspired her to go above and beyond, to create this perfect, impossible dream for us. I looked at the beautiful leather-bound lie in my hands, a document that detailed a trip I would never take, to a suite I would never sleep in, and I felt nothing but a profound and deeply misplaced sense of gratitude. The days leading up to our departure were a blur of happy, almost giddy preparation. The beautiful, leather-bound itinerary sat on my coffee table like a sacred text, a promise of the magnificent adventure that awaited us. My quiet, lonely house was filled with a new, hopeful energy. I bought new clothes. I practiced my rusty college-level French. I felt for the first time since my husband's death, a genuine, uncomplicated flicker of joy. My cautious, analytical nature, the part of me that had been a pharmacist for 40 years, was completely overruled by the hopeful, trusting mother. I chose to believe in the beautiful fiction Tiffany had presented. I chose to believe that this trip would be the healing balm our fractured family so desperately needed. But a pharmacist, even a retired one, never truly stops being a pharmacist. My mind is a library of compounds, of dosages, of interactions and side effects. And 2 days before our trip, as I was packing my own suitcase, a quiet, almost subconscious thought floated to the surface of my mind, a thought born of a deep, and apparently not quite dormant, instinct for self-preservation. I was thinking about Tiffany, about her high-strung, perfectionistic nature. I knew that for all her talk of a stress-free vacation, she would be a nervous wreck. The pressure to create the perfect content for her blog, to perform for her online audience, would be immense. And I knew, from years of observation, that her anxiety always manifested in a very specific physical way, a nervous, irritable stomach. The thought was clinical, not malicious. She is prone to stress-induced digestive distress, the pharmacist in me noted, as if diagnosing a patient. A gentle, natural and non-prescription remedy would be advisable. I went to the small, built-in apothecary cabinet in my bathroom, a beautiful old wooden thing, where I still kept a collection of herbs, supplements and natural remedies. It was my own personal pharmacopoeia. I opened a drawer filled with small labeled glass jars. I found what I was looking for. The first was a fine white powder psyllium husk, a simple natural fiber supplement. The second was a more potent and less well-known ingredient, senna leaf powder, a powerful all-natural herbal laxative. I knew the properties of both intimately. Separately they were effective. Combined, in the right ratio and in a sufficient dosage, they were a recipe for a swift, dramatic and deeply unforgettable gastrointestinal event. My movements were slow, deliberate and almost automatic, as if I were compounding a prescription I had made 1,000 times before. I took a small empty sachet, a beautiful high-end, silk paper thing that had once contained a very expensive brand of tea. I carefully measured out a precise, pharmacist-approved blend of the two powders. The result was a seemingly innocent and deeply potent daily fiber supplement. I folded the sachet and tucked it into a small, elegant envelope. On the front, in my neatest script, I wrote 2 words, "For Tiffany." My plan at that moment was a gentle one, a loving mother-in-law the gesture. I would give it to her on the plane. "Just in case you get a little traveler's tummy, dear," I would say, "a little insurance policy." A kind, thoughtful and entirely innocent gift. But then that afternoon I went to their apartment to drop off a small travel gift for Keith. He wasn't home, but Tiffany was, in the midst of her own packing. Her bedroom was an explosion of designer clothes and expensive luggage. Her main suitcase, a massive cream-colored high-end brand, was open on the bed. "Judith," she said, a little flustered by my unannounced arrival, "I'm in the middle of a complete disaster. I have no idea how I'm going to fit all of this." She was called away by a delivery at the front door, leaving me alone in her bedroom for a moment. And in that moment, a new, colder and far more strategic thought entered my mind. A thought that was not of the mother but of the quiet, calculating woman who had been watching and waiting. Why give it to her on the plane? Why not just put it where she would find it? A secret, helpful little surprise from her thoughtful mother-in-law. My hand moved. Again, with an almost autonomous will of its own, I took the small, elegant envelope from my purse, and with a hand that was as steady as if I were counting out pills, I discreetly and very, very carefully tucked it into the inner zippered pocket of her suitcase, a place where she would not find it until she had already unpacked in Paris. A small, ticking time bomb planted in the heart of her perfect, curated life. It was a terrible and deeply satisfying thought. The morning of our departure, the air at O'Hare International Airport was buzzing with the electric, hopeful energy of 1,000 different journeys about to begin. I felt a thrill of pure, uncomplicated excitement, the kind I hadn't felt since I was a young woman. My little act of strategic sabotage was already fading in my mind. A small, dark thought eclipsed by the bright, shining promise of Paris. I had done it. Yes. But I was almost sure it would not be necessary. The trip would be wonderful. We would connect. The secret weapon in her suitcase would remain a forgotten, harmless sachet of good intentions. We met at the Air France check-in counter for our first-class flight. Keith was beaming, a happy, excited tourist. I was a vision of grandmotherly, adventurous cheek. And Tiffany was the star of the show. She was dressed in a devastatingly stylish travel ensemble, A vision of cream-colored cashmere and expensive leather. She had all the documents, of course. The passports, the printed confirmations, all neatly organized in a designer travel wallet. She was in her element, the efficient, expert, and deeply in-control travel blogger. "Okay, everyone," she said, her voice a bright, cheerful command. "Passports, please. I'll handle this." We handed them over. She glided to the front of the first-class line, her expensive luggage trailing behind her like a royal retinue. Keith and I stood back, two happy, slightly irrelevant members of her entourage. She placed the 3 passports on the counter. The airline agent, a polite, professional woman, smiled. "Bonjour," she said. "Where are we flying to today?" "Paris." Tiffany replied, her own French accent perfect. 3 passengers. Thompson. The agent began to type. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. A small, professional frown appeared on her face. She typed again. She said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "That's strange. I'm only showing 2 passengers on this booking. A Keith and a Tiffany Thompson." Tiffany's bright, confident smile did not falter. "That can't be right," she said with a small, indulgent laugh. "There are 3 of us. My mother-in-law Judith Thompson is on the same booking." The agent typed again, her frown deepening. "No, I'm sorry," she said, her voice now a flat, official thing. "I have the reservation right here. It was booked for 2 adults only. There is no Judith Thompson on this flight, or on any flight to Paris today." And then the performance began. It was a masterpiece, a breathtaking theatrical tour de force. Tiffany's face, which had been a mask of cool, confident control, suddenly crumpled into a mask of pure, frantic, and deeply convincing panic. Her eyes went wide. Her hand flew to her mouth. "What?" she gasped, her voice a strangled whisper. No, that's impossible. I booked it myself. I remember booking it. 3 tickets." She began to frantically, theatrically scroll through her phone. "It must be here," she muttered, her fingers flying across the screen. "The confirmation email, the booking number, I had it all." Keith rushed to her side, his own face a mask of dawning, horrified concern. "Tiff? What's wrong?" They're saying, I didn't book your mother's ticket," she wailed, her voice now a high, tragic thing. She looked at me, her eyes shining with what appeared to be real, genuine, and deeply apologetic tears. "Judith," she said, her voice breaking, "I don't understand. I was so sure. I checked it a dozen times. It was a brilliant performance. It was flawless. But the pharmacist in me, the woman who had spent a lifetime looking at people and discerning the truth from the lie, saw it for what it was. A lie. A beautiful, perfectly executed, and deeply, deeply cruel lie. And in that moment, I was so glad that I had packed her a little something extra for her trip." The airline agent, a woman who had no doubt seen every form of travel-related human drama, was a wall of calm, professional impassivity. She listened to Tiffany's frantic, theatrical performance, with a kind of weary, detached patience. "I am very sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice a flat, corporate monotone that offered no hope. "But there is no ticket for a Judith Thompson in our system. The flight is completely full. There is nothing I can do." Tiffany turned to me, her face a perfect, tragic mask of devastation. She took my hands in her own, her grip surprisingly cold. Her eyes, which were now brimming with perfect, crystalline, and utterly fraudulent tears, looked deep into my own. "Judith," she began, her voice a choked, heartbroken whisper. "I am so sorry. I don't know how this could have happened. I feel absolutely, completely terrible. I have ruined everything. Our perfect family trip. She was good. She was magnificent. She was playing the part of the distraught, incompetent, but ultimately well-meaning daughter-in-law to perfection. She was creating a narrative of a simple, terrible mistake. A tragic, unavoidable accident. And then, having established her own blamelessness, she delivered the final, killing blow. The part of the script that had, I now knew, been written from the very beginning. She took a deep, shuddering, and deeply theatrical breath, as if steeling herself to deliver a piece of terrible but necessary news. She looked at me with an expression of profound and deeply condescending pity. We can't change it now," she said, her voice a soft, sorrowful thing. "The flight is boarding in 30 minutes. Keith and we have to go. The hotel, the reservations, everything is non-refundable." She paused, letting the brutal, practical reality of the situation sink in. And then with a sweet, pitying and utterly devastating smile, the kind one gives to a child who has just been told they can't have a puppy, she delivered the line that was the entire point of this elaborate, cruel and deeply unnecessary play. "You should go home, Judith," she said, her voice a gentle soothing balm of pure unadulterated poison. "Maybe next trip." Oops. The single unspoken word hung in the air between us, a small, perfect and deeply insulting summary of her entire monstrous performance. A $40,000 once-in-a-lifetime family trip, a mother's dream, all of it, reduced to a simple, careless and ultimately dismissive oops. I just looked at her. I did not speak. I did not cry. I did not rage. I simply looked at her, at this beautiful, brilliant and deeply, deeply rotten young woman, and I felt a profound sense of calm. A cold, quiet and deeply satisfying calm. The calm of a pharmacist who has just administered a powerful time-release medication and is now simply waiting with a patient, professional certainty for it to take effect. "My son, Keith," was the silent, tragic Greek chorus to his wife's masterful performance. He stood beside her, his face a pale, miserable mask of shame and a deep, gut-wrenching conflict. He knew, on some level, in the deep, quiet and cowardly part of his soul, he knew this was a lie. He knew his wife. He knew her meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail. Tiffany did not forget to confirm a first-class international airline ticket. It was not in her nature. But he was a man who had built his life on a foundation of avoiding conflict, of keeping the peace, of appeasing the powerful, an often difficult woman he loved. And so he stood there, and he said nothing. His silence was his complicity. His shame was his confession. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, at his own expensive shoes, a man who could not bear to witness the full, ugly scope of his own betrayal. "I am so sorry, Mom," he mumbled, his voice a low, pathetic thing. It was not an apology, it was a surrender. Tiffany, her work done, her victory secured, took his arm. "Come on, darling," she said, her voice now a gentle, soothing purr. She was leading him away, away from the messy, inconvenient problem of his own mother. "We're going to be late." They turned and began to walk towards the security checkpoint. A perfect, beautiful couple, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the bustling airport, a forgotten piece of luggage. And it was in that moment that I received the final beautiful and deeply damning piece of evidence I needed. As they walked away, their backs to me, I saw Tiffany lean in and whisper something in his ear. I am a woman who has spent a lifetime deciphering the quiet, mumbled requests of sick people in a noisy pharmacy. My hearing is excellent. And what I heard her whisper to him, her voice a low, triumphant and utterly contemptuous purr, was this. "See? I told you it would be fine. Now we can have a real romantic vacation." The confirmation was a gift. A beautiful, terrible and deeply clarifying gift. It erased any last lingering flicker of doubt I might have had. This was not a mistake. It was not an accident. It was a plan. A cold, cruel and meticulously executed plan to steal my money, to enjoy the fruits of my generosity, and to do it without the inconvenient, unphotogenic presence of me, the old, simple woman who had paid for it all. They disappeared into the crowd, on their way to their perfect romantic and mother-in-law-free vacation. They were on their way to Paris. They thought they had left me behind. They had no idea that the most important and most memorable part of my gift had already been packed, and was traveling with them, tucked away, a quiet, potent and deeply personal secret, in the inner pocket of my daughter-in-law's suitcase. The taxi ride home from O'Hare was a journey through a strange, new and unfamiliar emotional landscape. The initial hot shock of the betrayal had passed, leaving in its wake not a torrent of grief, but a profound and deeply unsettling sense of calm. The patient, loving and slightly naive mother who had driven to the airport that morning was gone. The woman who was riding home in the back of this taxi was someone else entirely. She was a retired pharmacist, and her mind was a cold, quiet and deeply efficient laboratory. I looked out the window at the familiar gray skyline of Chicago, but I was not seeing the buildings. I was seeing molecules. I was thinking about compounds, about dosages, about the beautiful, predictable and deeply unforgiving laws of cause and effect. I thought about the small silk paper sachet I had tucked into Tiffany's suitcase. I had labeled it, in my neatest script, Le Régulateur Parisien, a gentle, all-natural, daily fiber supplement for the discerning traveler. The name was a masterpiece of benign, healthful elegance. The contents, however, were a masterpiece of pharmacological warfare. The primary ingredient was simple psyllium husk, a common fiber supplement, harmless, but I had blended it, in a precise 40-60 ratio with a highly concentrated finely milled powder of the senna leaf. Senna, in the world of natural medicine, is known as nature's broom. It is a powerful and deeply effective stimulant laxative. In small, carefully controlled doses, it is a gentle relief. In the generous heaping teaspoon-sized doses that a health-conscious and deeply arrogant woman like Tiffany would be likely to use, it was a recipe for a swift, violent, and deeply humiliating gastrointestinal apocalypse. The beauty of the compound was in its subtlety. It was all natural. It was organic. It would not show up on any standard toxicology screen. It would simply mimic the symptoms of a particularly vicious and strangely persistent case of traveler's stomach. A case that would, I calculated with a grim professional satisfaction, last for the entire 3-week duration of their perfect Parisian vacation, especially if she, in her desperation to regulate herself, kept taking it every day. A small, grim smile touched my lips. I felt no guilt, no remorse. I felt only the quiet, satisfying click of a perfectly calibrated and entirely justified equation. The cause, their profound and deeply cruel disrespect. The effect, 3 weeks of profound and deeply unpleasant digestive distress. It was a beautiful, almost poetic balancing of the scales. The taxi pulled up in front of my quiet, empty house. I paid the driver and I walked up the steps. The house was the same, but I was not. The silence that greeted me was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a laboratory after a successful experiment has been set in motion. I went into my kitchen, put on a kettle for tea, and I sat down at my table. I thought of them at that very moment, 30,000 feet over the Atlantic, sipping champagne in their first-class seats, celebrating their clever, successful coup. They thought they were flying towards a dream vacation. They had no idea they were flying into a meticulously planned, 3-week-long nightmare of my own careful and professional design. The prescription had been delivered, and I knew with the pharmacist's absolute certainty that the side effects were about to be severe. 7 hours later, on the other side of the world, the dream began. Keith and Tiffany glided through the VIP customs line at Charles de Gaulle, their first-class status a magic wand that waved away all the usual hassles of international travel. A private car, which Tiffany had of course pre-arranged, was waiting to whisk them into the heart of Paris. They checked into their suite at the Four Seasons George V. It was not just a room, it was a small palace, a sprawling multi-room affair with silk wallpaper, antique furniture, and a private flower-filled terrace that offered a breathtaking postcard-perfect view of the Eiffel Tower. Tiffany, of course, did not waste a moment simply enjoying the view. The view was not a thing to be experienced, it was a thing to be leveraged. She immediately went to work, her phone in her hand, the curator of her own perfect life. She took a series of artfully composed photos, the welcome bottle of Cristal champagne, chilling in a silver bucket, the perfect heart-shaped macarons, arranged on a porcelain plate, the view from the terrace with her hand and her massive new diamond ring, elegantly draped over the railing. And then the pièce de résistance, a smug, beautiful selfie of her and Keith, their faces glowing with a mixture of jet lag and triumphant joy, the glittering Eiffel Tower framed perfectly between them. She spent the next 20 minutes crafting the perfect caption, a masterpiece of humble bragging and passive-aggressive shade. Finally, a peaceful Parisian escape. Sometimes the most luxurious thing in the world is a little bit of quiet. So excited to share this incredible intimate journey with my one and only. Some trips are just better with a smaller group. Boss at Parisian Dream, couple goals, George V. She posted it, and then, with a sigh of deep professional satisfaction, she finally allowed herself to relax. The performance for her online audience was complete. The narrative of her perfect, exclusive, and deeply romantic Parisian getaway had been successfully launched. She began to unpack, her movements a graceful ballet of expensive fabrics being removed from expensive luggage. She arranged her designer dresses in the vast walk-in closet, her collection of shoes on the velvet-lined shelves. It was as she was unpacking her toiletries, her collection of creams, serums, and supplements that she found it. Tucked away in the inner zippered pocket of her suitcase was a small, elegant, and unfamiliar envelope. She opened it, her brow furrowed in a slight, curious frown. Inside was the beautiful silk paper sachet with the elegant handwritten script on the front, Le Régulateur Parisien. She read the small, attached note, also in my neatest script. My dearest Tiffany, just a little something to help you stay feeling your best on your trip. Travel can be so disruptive to one's system, This is a wonderful all-natural fiber supplement I use myself. A spoonful in a glass of water every morning should keep you feeling light and lovely. With love, Judith." A small, condescending smile touched Tiffany's lips. It was so typical of Judith. So practical. So motherly. So utterly, completely harmless. "Oh, that's sweet of her," she said to Keith, holding up the sachet. "Your mother packed me a laxative." That evening was supposed to be the grand opening act of their perfect Parisian dream. They had a 9 o'clock reservation at L'Ambroisie, a 3 Michelin star restaurant that was less a place to eat and more a temple of haute cuisine. It was a reservation that was nearly impossible to get, a jewel in the crown of Tiffany's meticulously planned itinerary. As she was getting ready, her hand a blur of expensive makeup brushes and styling tools, she felt a slight, almost imperceptible twinge in her stomach. A little bloating. The long flight, the rich food in the first-class cabin, the champagne. It had all left her feeling a little less than her usual perfect self. And then, she remembered. The little sachet. The gentle, all-natural fiber supplement from her thoughtful, if simple mother-in-law. "Oh, perfect," she had said to Keith, who was in the process of wrestling with his tuxedo's bow tie. "I'm going to try that stuff your mother gave me. Just to, get things moving before the big meal." She had gone into the opulent marble bathroom and had opened the small, elegant sachet. A fine white and completely odorless powder had spilled into her hand. It looked pure, it looked healthy, it looked expensive. She had mixed a generous heaping teaspoonful into a tall glass of Evian water, the kind the hotel provided for free. The powder had dissolved instantly, leaving the water clear and clean. She had drunk it down, a small self-satisfied smile on her face. She was taking care of herself. She was a wellness expert, after all. The first 20 minutes at the restaurant were a dream. The room was a hushed, beautiful space of dark wood, crisp white linens, and the soft glow of candlelight. The air was filled with the low murmur of French, the clinking of baccarat crystal, and the scent of truffles. Tiffany was in heaven. She was already composing the Instagram caption in her head. The first course arrived. A single perfect langoustine poached in butter and resting on a bed of citrus-infused foam. It was a work of art. Tiffany took a delicate, reverent bite. It was, she would later recall with a sense of profound and tragic irony, absolutely exquisite. And then, the first real symptom arrived. It was not a gentle twinge. It was a low, ominous, and deeply urgent cramp that seized her abdomen with a sudden, shocking violence. It was a feeling she had never in her entire well-regulated life experienced before. Her face, which had been a mask of rapturous culinary delight, went pale. A fine sheen of cold sweat broke out on her forehead. "Are you all right, Tiff?" Keith had asked, his own face a picture of concern. "I'm fine," she had managed to say through gritted teeth. "Just a little indigestion." But it was not indigestion. It was a declaration of war from her own internal organs. The cramp intensified, becoming a hot, twisting knot of pure, agonizing misery. She knew with a sudden horrifying certainty that she had a very, very small window of time to get to a restroom before a deeply and publicly humiliating disaster occurred. She had thrown her napkin onto the table. "Excuse me," she had hissed, and had made a frantic, desperate, and deeply unladylike dash across the hushed, elegant dining room, her high heels clicking a frantic, panicked rhythm on the polished floor. The dream dinner had just turned into a nightmare, and the night was still very, very young. The rest of their evening at L'Ambroisie was not a meal, it was a hostage negotiation, and Tiffany's digestive system was the terrorist. She would emerge from the restroom, her face pale and shaken, and would return to the table just long enough for the next exquisite and deeply terrifying course to be served. The second course was a delicate seared foie gras with a fig reduction. She managed a single hesitant bite, her eyes wide with a new unfamiliar terror of her own body. A low, ominous gurgle from the depths of her abdomen was the signal that her time at the table was once again up. She excused herself with a strained, brittle smile, and made another slightly more frantic dash to the ladies' room. Keith was left alone at the table, a handsome, tuxedoed man in a state of profound and deeply public bewilderment. He pushed the exquisite food around on his plate, his appetite gone, his evening a slow-motion catastrophe. The other diners, the quiet, elegant elite of Paris, were beginning to notice the beautiful, stylish American woman at the corner table, the one who kept running to the bathroom as if she were being pursued by demons. It was becoming a quiet, fascinating floor show. By the time the main course arrived, a magnificent, perfectly roasted breast chicken for two, a dish the restaurant was famous for. Tiffany was a ghost. She was a pale, trembling specter who would appear at the table for a few agonizing minutes at a time, her hand pressed to her stomach, her face a mask of pure unadulterated misery. They were forced to leave before the cheese course, a sacrilege in a temple of French gastronomy like this. The journey back to the hotel in the taxi was a tense, silent, and deeply agonizing affair, punctuated only by Tiffany's low-pained moans. The unforgettable 3-Michelin-star dinner had, indeed, been unforgettable, but for all, and I do mean all, of the wrong reasons. It had not been a night of culinary ecstasy. It had been a night of profound and deeply embarrassing gastrointestinal distress. Tiffany had spent the most exclusive and expensive evening of her life in the one room that is the same in every restaurant in the world, no matter how many stars it has, the bathroom. And I, back in my quiet, peaceful home in Chicago, slept the deep, untroubled sleep of the just. The disastrous dinner at L'Ambroisie was not an isolated incident. It was the opening act of a 3-week-long tragicomedy, a relentless and systematic demolition of every single perfectly curated moment on Tiffany's dream itinerary. My little sachet of Le Régulateur Parisien was not a one-time weapon. It was a persistent, nagging, and deeply effective agent of chaos. Tiffany, in her desperate attempt to fix her mysterious and violent illness, kept taking her gentle, all-natural fiber supplement every single morning, and in doing so she was renewing her own subscription to a private personal hell. Their private after-hours tour of the Musée d'Orsay, a moment that was supposed to be a quiet, romantic communion with the Impressionist masters, was cut short after 20 minutes. Tiffany, who had been admiring a Degas sculpture, had suddenly gone pale, her hand flying to her stomach, and had spent the rest of their exclusive once-in-a-lifetime tour in a frantic, desperate search for a toilet, leaving Keith to have a very quiet, very lonely, and very expensive chat with a Renoir. Their romantic sunset cruise on the Seine was a similar disaster. The small, elegant boat was beautiful. The champagne was perfectly chilled. The view of Notre Dame at dusk was breathtaking, but Tiffany had seen none of it. She had spent the entire hour-long cruise curled in a ball of pure agonizing misery, in the boat's tiny cramped lavatory, the gentle romantic rocking of the boat, a new and special kind of torture for her rebellious insides. A personal shopping appointment at the flagship Chanel boutique on Rue Cambon, a moment Tiffany had been dreaming of since she was a little girl, ended in a blur of humiliation. She had been in the middle of trying on a devastatingly expensive tweed jacket, when the familiar, urgent, and deeply unwelcome internal alarm had sounded. She had been forced to abandon the jacket and make a desperate, frantic dash through the hushed, sacred halls of haute couture, leaving a trail of shocked and deeply judgmental sales associates in her wake. Every 5-star experience, every moment of planned, curated perfection was systematically and brutally ruined by her own traitorous body. The dream vacation had become a cursed Sisyphean nightmare. They were trapped in a loop of beautiful settings and deeply, deeply unpleasant physical realities. The perfect aspirational Instagram feed that Tiffany had been so excited to create had devolved into a series of vague, moody, and increasingly depressing posts. The triumphant selfies were replaced by artful, blurry shots of rainy Parisian streets, with captions like, "Paris is beautiful even when you're feeling under the weather." Travel struggles, or sometimes the most luxurious thing is a quiet day in the hotel room. Self-care. Her followers, who were used to a diet of pure unadulterated glamour, were beginning to get concerned. The gilded compass was, it seemed, broken. A week and a half into their disastrous cursed trip, on a grey and drizzly Parisian afternoon, Keith finally broke. They had been forced to cancel yet another non-refundable Michelin-starred dinner reservation because Tiffany was once again in the throes of a violent and deeply mysterious intestinal revolt. The beautiful opulent suite at the Georges Vif, which was supposed to have been their romantic love nest, had become a luxurious and very expensive sick bay. The romance was dead, replaced by a constant, simmering tension and a series of bitter whispered arguments. Keith was sitting alone on their private, flower-filled terrace, staring out at the rain-swept view of the Eiffel Tower. It was a view that should have been romantic. Instead, it just looked grey and sad, and deeply, deeply lonely. He looked at his wife, who was a pale, miserable heap under a pile of fretted linens on the king-sized bed, and he finally allowed himself to face the truth. This was not a random illness. This was not bad luck. This felt biblical. This felt like a curse, a targeted and deeply effective curse. And he knew with a sudden sickening certainty who the witch was. He picked up his phone, his hands trembling slightly, and he walked out into the hallway of the hotel, seeking a private space to make the most difficult, and most humiliating phone call of his life. I was in my kitchen, humming to myself as I rolled out the dough for a peach cobbler, when my phone rang. I saw his name and I felt not a sense of triumph, but a quiet, sad and deeply necessary sense of finality. It was time. "Hello, Keith," I said, my voice calm and gentle. "Mom," he began, and his voice was a raw, broken and deeply weary thing. "Mom, I am so sorry." And then, it all came tumbling out. The whole ugly and deeply pathetic story. He confessed everything. The plan to ditch me at the airport. Tiffany's cold, cruel ambition. His own weak and deeply shameful complicity. He told me the story not with excuses, but with a raw, brutal and deeply humbling honesty. It was her idea. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking with a mixture of shame and a new unfamiliar anger. "But I let her do it. I stood there and I said nothing. I was a coward, and I have been paying for it, every single day since we got here." He then described the vacation, the cursed trip, the endless, humiliating and deeply mysterious illness that had plagued his wife from the very first night. He described the ruined dinners, the cancelled tours, the constant agonizing and deeply unromantic reality of their Parisian dream. "It's like the city itself is rejecting her, Mom," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and a dawning superstitious terror. It's like a karmic biblical plague. Everything we try to do, every beautiful thing, it turns to crap, literally." I listened, my expression one of pure maternal sympathy. I made all the right comforting sounds. "Oh honey," I said, my voice full of a deep and deeply fraudulent concern. "That sounds absolutely awful. The poor dear, it must be a terrible case of traveler's stomach." "No, Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "It's not, it's something else. I think we are being punished." He was so close to the truth, so close to understanding the full, beautiful and deeply satisfying scope of my revenge. But he wasn't there yet, and it was time for me to deliver the final, devastating clue. The confession from my son was not just an apology, it was a surrender. The proud, confident and slightly arrogant man who had stood by and let his wife humiliate his mother was gone. In his place was a broken, humbled and deeply remorseful man who was finally painfully beginning to understand the concept of consequences. "Punished, honey?" I had said into the phone, my voice a perfect instrument of gentle, loving confusion. "What on earth for?" The question was a masterpiece of quiet, Socratic cruelty. I was forcing him to say it, to articulate the full, ugly scope of their betrayal. There was a long, painful silence on the other end of the line, and then he had whispered it. "For what we did to you, Mom, at the airport." "Oh, darling," I had replied, my voice a soothing balm of pure, unadulterated and deeply satisfying gaslighting. "Don't be silly, that was just a simple mistake. A booking error. It could have happened to anyone." He didn't know what to say to that. My refusal to acknowledge their cruelty was, in its own way, a more profound and more disorienting punishment than any angry outburst could have been. I was not giving him the relief of a fight. I was simply leaving him to drown in the quiet, and now undeniably cursed waters of his own conscience. The aftermath of that phone call, in their beautiful and now deeply claustrophobic Parisian prison, was a quiet, cold war. The frantic, passionate arguments were over, replaced by a thick, heavy and deeply resentful silence. They were no longer a couple on a romantic getaway. They were two cellmates, trapped in a luxurious 5-star jail of their own making. Tiffany's illness did not abate. In fact, her continued, desperate use of her gentle all-natural fiber supplement seemed to be making it worse. She was now a pale, weak and deeply irritable ghost of her former glamorous self. Her days were spent in a miserable triangle between the bed, the bathroom and the room service menu, where she would order plain toast and weak tea, her once sophisticated palate now reduced to the bland, beige diet of an invalid. The perfect Instagram feed had ground to a halt. The last post had been 3 days ago. A moody black and white photo of a rain-streaked window, with the simple, pathetic caption, "Parisian rain." The comments from her followers had shifted from envy to a genuine and deeply unwelcome concern. "Are you okay, Tiff? Thinking of you, hope you feel better soon." For an influencer whose entire brand was built on a foundation of effortless aspirational perfection, the public performance of illness and vulnerability was the ultimate, and most humiliating of failures. They were trapped. Their non-refundable first-class tickets home were not for another week and a half. A week and a half of more shared misery, of more silent, resentful meals, of more long, agonizing nights in a beautiful hotel room that now felt like the most expensive and most elegantly decorated tomb in the world. The dream vacation had become a long, painful, and deeply effective lesson in the simple, karmic truth that sometimes when you try to ditch your baggage, you find that it has a way of following you, in the most unexpected and most unpleasant of ways. The final scene took place on the last night of their trip from hell. They were not at a glamorous farewell dinner. They were in their hotel room, a silent, tense, and deeply miserable pair, surrounded by the sad, deflated evidence of their failed vacation. A pile of unworn, expensive clothes, a collection of ungiven shopping bags, a beautiful leather-bound itinerary that now read like a tragic comedy. Keith, my son, was on the phone with me. His voice was no longer the broken, apologetic whisper of the previous week. It was the dead, hollow, and deeply weary voice of a man who has completely and utterly surrendered. He was giving me a final, clinical report on the state of his wife's mysterious and deeply persistent illness. The hotel doctor came again, he said, his voice a monotone. He's baffled. He says it presents like a severe bacterial infection, but all the tests come back negative. He gave her some antibiotics, but they're not doing anything. It's like nothing he's ever seen before. Oh, the poor dear, I said, my voice a perfect soothing symphony of motherly concern. That sounds just awful. It doesn't sound like a curse, honey. It just sounds like she's having a strong reaction to some bad fiber. It happens. Tell her to drink plenty of fluids. I let the word fiber hang in the air, a small, innocent, and perfectly placed clue. I could almost hear the gears turning in his tired, defeated mind. Fiber. The supplement. His mother. The pharmacist. He was silent for a long, long moment. And then I heard it, a sharp, sudden, and deeply horrified intake of breath. He had it. He had finally, after 3 long, miserable weeks, connected the horrifying final dots. Mom? He whispered, and his voice was a new and deeply satisfying sound. It was a sound of pure dawning and utterly profound terror. That supplement you gave her, the one in the little bag, what exactly was in it? I let out a small, thoughtful hum, the sound of a woman searching her flawless and deeply reliable memory. Let me see, I said, as if it were a matter of little consequence. It was an all-natural herbal blend, a bit of psyllium, of course, some ginger root for calming the stomach, and I believe, a rather potent but very effective concentration of senna leaf. I heard him frantically typing on his laptop in the background. He was Googling senna leaf. I knew what he would be finding, words like powerful stimulant, purgative, not for long-term use, severe cramping. Oh my God, he whispered, his voice a strangled, horrified thing. Oh my God. Mom, I decided, in that moment, to deliver the final beautiful and deeply satisfying twist of the pharmacist's knife. And you know, I continued, my voice amusing, offhand thing, it's a funny thing about those little sachets. I always make them in batches, to save time, so you might want to check the rest of her suitcase. In the lining, in the little pockets, sometimes those supplements come with refills. I heard a sound on the other end of the line that was a mixture of a gasp and a sob. I could picture the scene perfectly, him staring at the phone in horror, and Tiffany, in the other room, a pale, miserable creature, hearing his words, her eyes going wide as she finally understood that her mysterious 3-week-long illness was not a curse. It was a prescription, and it had been administered with a cold, professional, and deeply satisfying precision by the quiet little pharmacist she had so foolishly and so catastrophically underestimated. I hung up the phone. I did not say goodbye. The consultation was over. I sat there, in my quiet, peaceful house in Chicago, and I took a slow, deliberate sip of my evening tea. A small and deeply satisfied smile touched my lips. The scales had been balanced, the account had been settled, and the prescription, I had a feeling, would not be refilled again.